We could look at all the studies. Local journalism is dying, and so is our democracy. Okay, cool. Well, how do we do something different? And so the concept we came up with was sort of looking at the macro lens of what do newspapers own? They own this concept of community. They've just been expressing themselves through newspapers, through physical and digital, whatever it is, kind of experiences. What might it look like if we communed community? We've actually brought people together.
This is Small Press, Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Quartz. Small Press, Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Max Kabat. Max is, according to his LinkedIn, a brand fixer at the Good Dog Agency, and he's a local journalism entrepreneur at the Big Bend Sentinel in Marfa, Texas, which is partially the reason I want to get him on here and talk to him today. So Max, thank you. Thanks for joining me and taking the time.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
And for anybody listening, taking the time right by a golf course or no, park. I'm sorry, something like that.
I think it's the both.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. Max, so I did a very brief intro of your background, but I'd love for you to just tell me in your own words, give me just kind of your bio on your career, and if that's not too broad, what brought you to Marfa and the Big Bend Sentinel and where you're at now?
Yeah, sure. A broad question, but I'll dive into where you left off. My wife and I moved to Marfa, Texas, a town in rural American far west Texas at the mouth of Big Bend Country, which is a national and a state park on the border of Texas to Mexico. We moved out there in 2016. Long story short, after getting to be a part of the community and meeting a couple folks over a couple of years, Robert and Rosario, who ran the local newspaper, the Big Bend Sentinel, and another newspaper, El Internacional, a bilingual paper for the border. After 30 years, they were going to retire, and my wife, Macy, award-winning documentary filmmaker and photojournalist, and myself, a brand fixer, did we want to get involved in taking over, and what did we think of that? So our idea was to sort of reimagine how to make local independent journalism thrive instead of just survive, and that's what led us to doing what we did.
That's awesome. And also for anybody listening, this may come up again in the conversation, but kind of what led me to find Max and get you on my radar was a piece you wrote on LinkedIn, or at least I found it on LinkedIn, called "Local Journalism is in the Wrong Business." And it's a great read. I just wanted to throw that out there now. I'm going to link to that in the show notes, and I think everybody should go read that also. Maybe if you're listening, go read it and then come back and listen to the rest of our conversation. But anyway, so my next question was basically how you became the co-owner of the Big Bend Sentinel, but you kind of got into that just through your personal network in the town and being in the small town. I'm in a small town, so I kind of, the network effect in a small town is a different thing than if you're in a big city or something like that. What was the Big Bend Sentinel like before? You said they were I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the previous owners' names, but they've been doing it for Rosario and Robert. So they've been doing it for decades. Was it just a standard print operation, newspaper? Like when you came in, is that what the operation looked like at that point?
Yeah, there wasn't much of a digital presence. It's a weekly. We haven't changed any of that stuff. But it's El Internacional and the Big Bend Sentinel. They're two weekly newspapers for and by the community about local happenings. They're in their 70s at this point, so it was getting to a place in the last couple of years before we took over where the paper, it wasn't a really large staff as much as it has been previously, but it's had really great writers come through over the years, and people that have gone to do some pretty awesome things. It participated. It's sort of tracked. I like to say local journalism is in the business of building community, but it's also in the business of capturing the history of a place and its people and sort of recording that. And so there's been a really interesting trajectory of this small dot in a sea of nothingness over the last 100 years of which the Big Bend Sentinel has existed. And so it sort of documented um, those those highs and lows of population and of happenings, and we just came in and sort of said, how do we sort of unlock all of these stories and the value that we feel like is sort of stuck inside of this business. Robert and Rosario ran a playbook that everybody else had run. They had sort of done what people had done in the business of local journalism, which is continued to put out a print product year after year. They had sort of started to dabble in a small way in the idea of being a digital publication and a little bit in social media. So there was, we thought there was an opportunity to do some small things from a digital standpoint and a social standpoint that could really amplify the print product, but we didn't want to, we accepted the fact that being in the local journalism business in a small town, if you're going to sort of fight the fight of digital first, and go toe to toe with the likes of Facebooks and Googles and all that kind of stuff, it's a losing battle. So we believe really strongly in the print product that we inherited, and believe in the print product that we've sort of doubled down on. We've made a stronger print product. We haven't given that up by any stretch of the means. We've just sort of amplified that. That's still the hero product for us.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. I've been, I don't come from a journalism background. Anybody listening to the podcast has probably heard this too many times, but I've gotten more and more interested in it, especially since starting this podcast. And I found that a few times in some of these smaller, more rural areas that print is actually, it's working. I had one lady on the podcast who, she runs Planeta Venus, which is a Spanish-speaking paper in Wichita, Kansas. And they started online and actually added a print format because that's what the community wanted. That's how they wanted to consume their news. So it's cool to hear that that's what do you call it, the hero product still, and that's still going strong also.
Yeah, I mean, look at all the print products. First of all, I too am not of this world, right? I come from the other region. I come from a place that isn't publishing. I didn't come from a media background. I didn't grow up in newspapers or local journalism or any of that kind of stuff. Neither did my wife. She obviously came up in journalism, and that was through publications and local news and all those kinds of things in big cities and like Boston and around Baltimore. But that being said, if you look at the way in which publishing sort of goes through these cycles, local journalism has never. Knight Foundation can invest as much money as it wants to, and the likes of others can invest as much money as they want to into sort of building foundational infrastructure, and they've done a fantastic job at that. But the truth is, we're always going to be chasing our tail, trying to keep up with all that kind of stuff. We're not in the business of innovation. We're in the business of community building, is sort of what my argument is in that piece. And I think all those foundational infrastructure are super important. Getting everybody on the same page is super important, but you have to realize and recognize, when you're taking over a legacy product, when you're taking over something that has assets, what are the assets that are working and what's not? And so for us, it was, the print is working. People want the print. Tourism is coming to this area, and they're sort of escaping a moment of being in a big city, and they're slowing down. Why am I going to give up a product that slows people down? That would be ridiculous. And so, I don't care what's happening around the outside world. That's the situation that we are walking into. That is of this place and of the people that live here and of the people that are coming to here. That's the opportunity for the audience. And so that's sort of what we leaned into. And you also have, from a print perspective, look at all the people that are relaunching print publications. Look at The Onion. Look at
Are they
Look at
relaunching?
Mount.
I
Yeah,
didn't hear that.
yeah, they
Interesting.
just relaunched and they have a really awesome print product. Look at Mountain Gazette. Look at Monocle. Look at, I don't know, I'm here in Los Angeles and I just picked up a couple of, you know, free pubs that are in the business. I wouldn't say they're necessarily local journalism, but they're local publications that are about a place and its people, and they're glossy magazines. Those are things that are different. It's sort of, it creates a different kind of way to talk to people and intercepts them in a different kind of way than our digital, always on, all the time moments. And you need to have differentiation if you're local. You can't be playing a game of, we're not in the business of breaking news 16 times a day. That we're playing a different game. And so if you're going to play a different game, you need to deliver the mechanism of which you deliver news and information needs to also be playing a different game.
That's great. I love it. I love the way you think about things. And it's funny. Are you familiar with Keith Pepper down in Atlanta, Rough
Yeah,
Draft
yeah, yeah,
Atlanta?
yeah.
I just had him on the podcast, and he actually
Cool,
I just got this in the mail the other day, one of their
cool,
print products. And it's
cool.
so cool, like just having this like in my hands and like flipping through it. It feels like an era gone by, but it's like when you actually, I do a lot. I'm all digital. I produce podcasts for publishers and other entities. I record this podcast. Everything is digital, and actually getting something physical like that and holding it, it's just like a different experience, you know? And when you combine
100%.
that, yeah, when you combine that with that feeling of community, it's a great thing.
And there's a
What?
reason why we ship newspapers across the country. We ship to 40 something states each week
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. That's
because
cool.
people want that. They want to feel that feeling, and it's a way for them to sort of revisit from a tourist standpoint, a second homeowner standpoint. It's a way for them to sort of revisit that without having to come all the way out to the middle of nowhere.
Yes. And just for the record, how big is Marfa, or how big is the area, like the area that it serves also?
Sure, Marfa is the population of Marfa is less than 2,000 people.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay. It's really small.
yeah, super small. The landmass of the Big Bend region is larger than the size of the state of Maryland. I'll repeat that. Square mileage wise, it's larger than the size of the state of Maryland, but there are 18,000 permanent residents.
Wow. Okay.
So it's the borderlands.
Right.
Where
Right.
Marfa is in a border county. Two of the counties that make up the Big Bend region are border counties. They're some of the largest counties in Texas, and they are the least populated. So it's the middle of nowhere for sure.
Okay. Interesting. Awesome. And then, okay. So we kind of talked about how when you came into the business, what it looked like and some of the changes you've made. And I'd like you to dive into that a little bit more specifically because, we've been talking about, you talked a lot about community, and we talked about the print product, digital, social, all that stuff. But you made even bigger, more kind of, I would say, creative changes than that to the actual, like the physical building and everything. So I was wondering if you could just talk about that a bit. What's the Sentinel and the old building look like today, and the full kind of scope of the operation for the audience?
For sure. So when we first took over, or when we were first sort of propositioned with taking over the paper, and we went from sort of this progression of no, maybe, I don't know, yes. As we worked through that, it was about how do we looking at this as sort of a brand and looking at this as a group of assets, not just like a newspaper. And how could we unlock value out of this? What else could we do with this? Because the reality is I'm a brand fixer. I have a brand and business strategy consultancy. My wife makes documentary films. I'm in a car in Los Angeles because my wife has screenings here for the Academy. And we wanted to, she's been traveling so much, we took our son to like go do some Disney stuff because he's a little kiddo. And so like, that's, the reality is we wanted to have these other careers and have these other jobs, but we wanted to sort of do something together. And our naivete came to the forefront and said, I've been working in the consulting world of helping founder-built businesses work through growth plateaus as they scale. My wife's been in journalism and storytelling in a bunch of different capacities, mostly visual, none of which were sort of written word. And so we needed to drive more top-line revenue to have more journalists. We didn't want to just go along to get along. We wanted to do something that was a little different. We wanted to add value. We wanted to expand coverage We wanted to make it thrive instead of just survive. And we were very realistic with, this is 2019, the conversation started in 2018, but it's 2019 when we took over. And so we were very realistic about like the mathematics. We could look at all the studies. Local journalism is dying and so is our democracy. Okay, cool. Well, how do we do something different? And so the concept we came up with was sort of looking at the macro lens of what do newspapers own? They own this concept of community. They've just been expressing themselves through newspapers, through physical and digital, whatever it is, kind of experiences. What might it look like if we communed community? We've actually brought people together in a physical form and got people off of Facebook and these social platforms where they yell at each other and sort of hide behind this facade. And what happens if we actually brought people together and had them talk to each other? What a novel concept. How would we do that? How would we participate in a capitalistic society where people pay for things and realizing, coming to terms with the fact that local journalism is expensive and no one wants to pay for it? What do people want to pay for? So the concept, lo and behold, that we came up with was sort of recognizing it was a third space. It's a mixed use retail space where we have a cafe, coffee, restaurant, retail space, and we host events. And we just looked at the economy that existed. It's a tourism based economy. And that's sort of the model that worked with what exists and what does the community need. It needs a place that isn't it needed a third space. It needed a place for people to come together and hang out and talk to each other that wasn't a lobby of a hotel.
Man, that's so cool. I love what you said in there. It might have to go with the kind of the teaser at the front of the podcast, how you said, local journalism isn't working. What is working? It's a great way of thinking about it, like from a more, business standpoint, of sustainability, because that word gets thrown around a lot, is what I found in this, just doing this podcast, sustainability. And a lot of times it comes back to people just talking about philanthropy or something, which you and I have spoken about, and like true sustainability, like being a part of the community, sustaining itself long-term, and I'm getting off.
Yeah.
I'm getting off track here, but yeah.
No. But I think for like it's all of a piece, right? We're all like a lot of people talking about. There's the concept of diversified revenue, and I think that's really important. And 5 years ago, we sort of happened upon the idea. We didn't come from this world, right? But we happened upon this idea of like we need to diversify revenue because that's how it's. If we're going to do this, that's how we have to make it work. We have to diversify our revenue streams, and sort of we've created a bunch of paths forward for us to do that. Trading on the hero product, trading on the brand name. It's all of a piece. If people want to go way down the rabbit hole, they can understand the ways in which the newspaper / media company interacts with the space and how this person's a barista or is serving cocktails at this event that we have, but at the same time, they're actually the reporter. Like it's all of a piece, but philanthropy is really interesting. And I think all these different diversified revenue streams are really interesting. What I'm trying to get us to question is, if there's this influx of capital, what do we do with it? How do we turn that into ways in which you can make money? Sustainability is about sustaining. It isn't about taking some money that you're going to use to build something that isn't going to be able to support itself and won't exist if that revenue stream of philanthropy disappears. If you're going to take in money, how are you going to turn that into something that's going to sustain itself, make more money to support itself? That's true sustainability. And I don't know that I'm hearing enough of that conversation. That's what I'm sort of trying to challenge us with.
Yeah. And this also goes back to that piece, the local journalism is in the wrong business. Everybody, once again, go read that. It's great. And I also wanted to mention to anybody listening to go to the website for the Sentinel, Marfa. I'll also link to that. And just have a look, just from a visual standpoint, I think you guys have done a great job there, too, as a physical retail space to inviting. Like if I was on a road trip with my family, I guarantee my wife would make a stop and be like, let's go check that place out right there. It's right up her her millennial tastes. I'm sure we'd be stopping in there on the way through Marfa. But also, so you talked a lot about community. What has been the reaction of the actual space and maybe the changes you've made with the Sentinel in the community, if any? What have you heard from people?
Yeah. People enjoy the fact that the newspaper is a stronger product. The publishing is stronger. We have more reporters. They're more senior reporters. We're able to do more in-depth journalism and also cover more things, not just in the town of Marfa and the county of Presidio, but we're able to really work our way around the Big Bend region more easily because we have more fans. We are able to provide, success comes in multiple formats. We employ about 20 people in a small town of less than 2,000. That's sort of a big deal, right? Like if you go backwards to newspapers at a point in time, local publishing, they were one of the biggest employers in town, and that's really long gone. And so we created a model where that's actually a real thing again. So, yes, top line and bottom line, those are super important metrics too. We've grown readership to be bigger. We make more money on the bottom line, and top line as these entities. So success comes in myriad ways, but for us, it's about looking at this as sort of a piece. How are we affecting the community? Are we inspiring new conversation? Are we able to go in depth and do more reporting on things that matter? We just did earlier this year, we did a really awesome in-depth reporting project on rural mental health care and what does that look like in the Big Bend region. So yeah, for us, it's been a super successful sort of evolution. We don't like to call it a revolution. We call it an evolution of what the newspaper is and how it works and the coverage it provides and the hope like sort of the conversation that it has with the community, the part of the community it is.
Man, so cool. That's great. And it sounds, it's also just impressive that sounds like grown it like that. The coverage and, just what do you say, you employ 20 people in a town that size? That's super impressive. And the other thing I didn't really mention in my notes or anything to get started is like, you took over in 2019. It's a crazy time to ride this out, a community thing in a small town, through COVID and everything, and still do that. So very impressive.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm not trying to blow smoke, but it's a cool story, Yeah.
We took over at a interesting time for all that stuff. To be taking over one business and sort of starting a new business as well. We opened the doors of the Sentinel and published our first newspapers as owners on July 4th of 2019. So we didn't really have much of a runway until the world drastically changed. We didn't think it would change that fast. We knew things would change, but we didn't think it would change that fast.
And so like when you took over on July 4th, 2019, is this kind of the vision you had all along? Is this what you wanted to turn it into, or has it morphed along the way? It sounds like a success, but is this like, did you have your eyes on the prize the whole way along of this whole broader community, retail space, everything? Yeah.
Yeah. If you look back at the notes or the ideas that we were hoping to accomplish, which was the idea. Sure. Have we looked at different revenue streams maybe surprised us? Sure. But creating a physical space, we moved the paper, right? The building wasn't for sale where the paper used to be. We moved it to a piece of real estate that had been closed for 4 years and had many lives and sort of had a story in and of itself. It had been a place that was a West Texas dance hall and a bar restaurant. It had been a funeral home. It had been a horse stables and a general store. It's, some of the Adobes are 100 years old. Like we very much thought about building a branded business and an ecosystem that would support the newspaper and local journalism from the start, and sort of like 5 years later, it is what we were hoping to accomplish for sure.
Well, that's awesome. That's a win by any measure right there, if that's what it's turned into. So real quick, so you talked before about diversified revenue streams, and you said just now you said you'd been maybe have been surprised by some revenue stuff. I was wondering if you could walk me through maybe. I'm guessing when you came in, it was probably standard, advertiser revenue, and I know now you've got the retail space, you've got coffee, cocktails. What's the kind of you don't have to share numbers or anything like that, but what's the mix look like in terms of revenue and like maybe the amount of different streams you've got coming in and what that looks like now today?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we inherited a model that was pretty fixed, right? And everybody had been pretty fixed. It was like people pay for access or donate, or there are humans that pay for the access or the actual publication of content, and then there are advertisers that want to pay to access the people. And that's about all there was. People had talked a lot about sort of this event strategy. What is Texas Tribune's been around for 15 years. So 5 years ago, it had been around for 10 years. And that was like a model. People were talking about events. We thought about where we were and how it works. So sure, we wanted to have events, but we look at what we built as like an event everyday strategy, not necessarily like these sort of one key moment, because we don't live in a big city. There's a small amount of people. We wanted to bring people in, sure, members, but we wanted to bring people in a different capacity. So sure, they're paying for a publication and to get the paper every day, but we also realized that, every week, but we also realized that we live in a community where there's a large percentage of people that live at or around the poverty line. And so how do we not exclude people? How do we include people? We didn't become a co-working space because that's exclusionary. We became sort of a third space that sells things to be inclusionary. So the paper is $1 each week, but we sell, rugs for over $1,000. And so we, as a brand fixer, if you are for everybody, you are for nobody. And so there's a lot of high and low that exists within our business. And we are sort of for everybody, but we're for everybody that is of a place and its people. And I think that's a little bit different, right? It's brands talk a lot about building community and building brand love. That doesn't just come from it. I build a lot of psychographics and look at data and build a lot of psychographic profiles to build out audience for a growth trajectory for a business. This is about being really realistic for whom you are and where they are and what do you have that's available to you. It's not 100,000 person city. It's a 2,000 person town.
Beautiful. Great stuff. So I had this question in here. You mentioned in the piece, in the local journalism is in the wrong business. You had this part that I really liked that said that you think that your model could be replicated, but that each mix of revenue needs to be location specific. Different towns, like you just said, different places or just different communities. Do you have any thoughts on what that could look like in a different type of community, or kind of what you were thinking when you wrote that?
Yeah, a real-time example is I was just hired by a community foundation in a town and county in Texas that is looking to sort of take the learnings and what we've built and replicate it for themselves in their community. And it's about, they have a couple different sort of smaller local journalistic titles. It's about taking those and sort of making those of a piece, but also creating a sort of physical manifestation of community, and figuring out how to tie those two together, and what does the capital structure look like, and who are the owners, and how do you sort of bring in all these different kinds of capital to invest into a thing. I think that there's a couple things American API.
American Press Institute, yeah.
Yes, thank you. American Press Institute. I just penned something for them, and at the bottom I sort of was like, these are the things that you need to sort of, the questions that you need to ask yourself. I think for me, we're in this moment where there's so many local journalistic endeavors that are launching that are digital first. The amount of the capital expenditure is lower to create an output, but the reality is a lot of those people aren't business people, and so I think what we're learning is we end up in a situation where you're asking people that grew up and came from a model to do something drastically different. And I think that's really hard. And so why are we tasking somebody that's all of a sudden was a journalist and now is all of a sudden a publisher and an owner of said local journalistic endeavor to figure everything out? I think that's really hard. And I think that the foundational infrastructure that has been built with investment, whether it's IndieGraph or News Revenue Hub or NewsPack or whatever, that's super important. But what else? And so, sort of to replicate this model, it's about collaboration. And I think that's also something that the local journalism industry isn't really great with. We have been fantastic. If you look back in the history, the industry has done a fantastic job at capturing the history of place and its people, capturing change, bringing light to new innovative ideas or things that are happening. But in and of itself, it hasn't changed much. And we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, doing something different, or else we're going to go from here to here, and then that's not going to be enough. We're going to still be stuck in this perpetual cycle of sort of chasing our own tail and hoping that somebody comes and sort of saves the day. And that's not, to go back to an earlier point, that's not a sustainable model. That isn't built on sustainability. That's built on how do we survive for tomorrow, not how does this thing continue on for another century.
Right. Yeah. That's been kind of a recurring theme on here, just on this show too, is that the need for the collaboration and I have this kind of thesis with the show where I think the answer's out there. The interest in local news and local community hasn't waned once in the midst of this entire crisis for
it's probably
20 or 30 years or whatever.
Yeah, gotten more entrenched. And so what do you do with that? Get outside. Exactly. My thought process, and I think we're sort of starting to scratch the surface, but that's something we really need to ramp up, is like, go talk to more people. Go look at other models that get outside of just ourselves. We don't have the answer. If local journalism had the answer, they would be doing it already. Go talk to somebody else. Get outside of the industry. Who else wants to participate? Who else wants to do something? Who else wants to create a model that's going to work? Because this doesn't, right? It doesn't. And adding philanthropic dollars to sort of stoke the fires, I think, are super important. But what do you do with it? And how do you actually bring other ideas to the table that create a sustainable revenue stream, that build a brand, that don't just build a thing that talks at people, speak with people, create more of an infrastructure that brings people together and serves more than one purpose in somebody's life besides just being this thing that provides news and information.
Yeah. And, as you and I kind of said on our pre-record call, like, if you've done it in Marfa, Texas, a town of 2,000, this kind of thing, something, this stuff can happen anywhere. You can make it, we could figure it out. We can make it work. It's out there. It's just like a matter of putting the puzzle pieces together. All right. We're running up on time here. Is there anything I missed that you'd love to touch on right now? I got through most of the questions. I've gotten a great amount of value out of this conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and,
for sure, man.
Like, once again, I'm a big fan of what you've done down there in Marfa. But yeah, anything else that I missed that you want to bring up?
No, I think like we sort of touched on it all. Yeah, I'm super excited about the conversations I'm having about replicating our model. And
that's very interesting too.
Yeah, I'm really interested. Like, that's what I'm most interested right now, is like, we did this. There wasn't a model that existed. There were things that there were threads that were out there. We just sort of put the pieces of the puzzle together, and we have figured out a way how to make it more than sustainable. And we've sort of like started to scratch the surface on a lot of different things. So how do we take that and go replicate that to places where there are more people, places where you have more assets, more bandwidth, more individuals that want to help? That to me is super interesting, and what I'm spending my time on.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's totally replicable. Replicable, is that a word?
Yeah, I know. I struggle with that one too.
Repeatable, and even in a bigger city, it could just be for this neighborhood, these square blocks or whatever. It could be done same thing there, so it could happen anywhere. Awesome. All right. Well, where can people find you? Where do you want me to link to in the show notes or anything like that? And how can people follow along, or what do you want to point to?
Yeah. You can shoot me a note, Max at thesentinelmarfa.com. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. Our website, the newspaper's website is bigbendsentinel.com. The physical spaces website is thesentinelmarfa.com. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram are probably our most active channels.
Awesome. I'll link to all that. I'll link to all that, and I'm going to link to this piece you wrote up in LinkedIn as well, because I thought it was great.
Awesome.
Cool. Max, thank you so much. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day out there. I'm jealous. It's snowing here, and you're in LA.
Oh my God.
It seems a little nicer out there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome to October 30th, I guess.
Seriously, it was 75 degrees 3 days ago here in Western
God.
Colorado, and it's freaking wet snow now. Thank you for listening to Small Threads, Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.